Good afternoon. My name's John Levy. It's my distinct privilege to serve as the 10th chair of the board of the Legal Services Corporation. And on behalf of our outstanding LSC board, I welcome you to this special forum on increasing access to justice. Our forum today will have a special focus on the critical role that civil legal aid plays in housing matters. As former Michigan representative and co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Access to Civil Legal Services Caucus, Fred Upton observed, and I quote him, "Our mission is to support giving every single American a fair shot in legal proceedings. There are times when a good lawyer is a necessity, when their assistance is the difference between eviction and keeping your home." Well, today we will be very privileged to hear remarks from two distinguished speakers, Judge Stephanie Dawkins Davis of the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, and Elizabeth Clement, the immediate past Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court and the current President and CEO of the National Center for State Courts. We will hear recorded remarks because Congress is in session from members of Congress who could not be with us in person, including your Senator Gary Peters, Representatives Helen Scholten, Debbie Dingell, and Kristen Rivet. Our program also features 3 illuminating panels, and we'll hear directly from a client who has benefited from legal aid here in Michigan. The first panel, moderated by Jennifer Bentley, Executive Director of the Michigan State Bar Foundation, will focus on local eviction diversion programs, legal aid leaders, a court facilitator, and a property manager will discuss how their collaboration has helped to keep Michiganders in their homes. The second panel, moderated by OSC President Ron Flagg, includes a legal aid leader, a director from a wonderful Detroit foundation, and they will describe how civil legal aid keeps families in their homes across generations. And the final panel, moderated by our distinguished board member Robert Gray, features prominent local business leaders discussing why access to justice should be a priority for all of us, including the private sector. Well, as we gather here today, we're nearing the end of LSC's 50th anniversary year. The Legal Services Corporation was established on July 25th, 1974, when Richard Nixon signed the LSC Act to, quote, help provide equal access to the system of justice in our nation and provide high-quality legal assistance to those who would be otherwise unable to afford adequate legal counsel. Of the corporation LSC Act created, Nixon said, "Here, each day, the old, the unemployed, the underprivileged, the largely forgotten people of our nation may seek help," unquote. Well, 50 years later, as you all know all too well, they're still seeking help, and LSC and its grantees across the country are providing it. In fact, during these 5 decades, our extraordinary national network of providers has helped nearly 75 million low-income Americans with their civil legal problems. And LSC has become the nation's single largest funder of civil legal aid, supporting 130 legal aid providers with 900 offices, every county, state, as well as the District of Columbia and the U.S. territories. And these organizations provide legal services for more than 5 million low-income Americans annually, including more than 1 million children, over 200,000 survivors of domestic violence, nearly 45,000 veterans. 16% of Americans currently qualify for LSC-funded assistance because their household income is at or below 125% of the federal poverty guideline, and unfortunately, as you likely know, LSC's 2022 Justice Gap report revealed that low-income Americans do not receive any or enough legal help for 92% of their substantial civil legal problems. When you consider that that report also found that 74% of low-income houses experience at least one civil legal problem a year, and 39% whether 5 or more, well, you see the magnitude of the challenge. And this shortfall in legal assistance has dire consequences. Recent studies show that people with legal representation are 6.5 times more likely to win their cases than those without, and in housing court in this country, if you're represented, you have a 90% chance of a favorable outcome, but if you aren't, you have a 90% chance of being evicted. And equally of concern, recent studies show that in state civil courts across this country, 50 to 75% of the cases, one or both parties are unrepresented by counsel. Well, the chronic underfunding of LSC has helped to fuel this crisis in civil legal aid and has forced many of our grantees to turn away as many eligible applicants as they're able to help because of a lack of resources. And in addition to seeking more LSC funding, LSC and its grantees have launched a series of initiatives over the past few years to try and help narrow the justice gap. For the past 25 years, LSC has convened the only national conference focused exclusively on the use of technology to address the civil legal needs of low-income Americans. The first such conference was attended by 32 individuals. This year, and I was there, more than 700 attended, and what a conference it was. LSC has also convened 3 technology summits, resulting in a highly acclaimed blueprint for using innovative technology to transform the delivery of civil legal services. And of course, LSC's Technology Initiative Grants Program has played a major and direct role in helping to develop legal tech innovations since it was founded in 2000. And during this period, the Tech Initiative Grant Program, the TIG program, has awarded 924 projects across the country, totaling more than $90 million. And this funding has been used by our grantees to enhance online resources for self-represented litigants, making existing tools more mobile-friendly, deploying AI to streamline intake and client services, and more. Increasing the role of private lawyers in civil legal aid can also help to narrow the justice gap. Well, I'll have more to say about that at the pro bono reception, so stay tuned. LSC grantees are also collaborating with and learning from the medical community. 90 grantees now participate in some form of medical legal partnership. That's about 2/3 of the organizations we fund, and LSC has also raised private funds. And thank you to so many here who are helping as a part of that effort to modestly complement our congressional field grant appropriation to support important new initiatives assisting our grantees in educating the country about the gravity of the crisis in access to justice. And among these are, of course, 2 comprehensive justice gap studies, the most recent, 2022, the Rural Summer Legal Corps, which places 45 law students with LSC-funded civil legal aid providers in rural locations each summer, a Midwestern disaster preparedness project to develop coordinated plans between disaster preparedness organizations and legal services providers. A legal aid curriculum for public librarians, often the first people low-income folks consult with when seeking to find a legal aid provider. National task forces addressing and providing guidance and best practices for our grantees, including the civil legal aid implications of natural disasters, opioid abuse, veterans issues, housing insecurity, and the need for more effective pro bono. Task forces focused on evictions and rural justice challenges are completing their work this year. Quarterly forums on access to justice, like this one, showcasing the important work of our grantees and underscoring the crisis in civil legal aid, providing periodic training for executive directors and CFOs of all of our grantees. And just a few weeks ago, LSC released a compelling study finding that civil legal aid yields an average positive return of $7 for every $1 invested in legal aid, and that's because civil legal aid prevents and solves legal problems before they lead to even more costly public expenditures on things like emergency medical care, law enforcement, and shelters. And the study also found that legal aid helps improve family stability, leading to their increased participation in their local economies and reduced reliance on other forms of assistance. Well, 30 years ago, Congress appropriated $400 million for LSC. Although we appreciate that the congressional continuing resolution for this fiscal year extended LSC's funding of $560 million through September, much more is needed to close this significant justice gap after years of serious underfunding. And in fact, our bipartisan LSC board voted unanimously to request from Congress $2.1 billion for LSC's fiscal year 2026 budget. Well, that's why it's particularly alarming to me, our board and our grantees, that the administration's proposed budget for fiscal year 26 proposes to end federal funding of LSC. Just today, the House Appropriations Committee proposed a budget of $300 million for fiscal year 26, a 46% cut to LSC's funding. Well, this would return LSC's budget to a 1999 level and would result in 3 million fewer Americans receiving civil legal services. Well, while we're encouraged that in fact that House committee did not follow the administration's proposal to eliminate LSC funding, we remain hopeful that the Senate will prioritize LSC in their appropriations bill, and ultimately we see an increase in LSC's budget. We once again strongly encourage and implore Congress to do just that, significantly increase the funding of LSC and its grantees. In particular, as the nation prepares for its 250th anniversary, I can't help but reflect on our country's founders' belief that ensuring access to justice was the foundation of a just society. Thomas Jefferson called it the most sacred of the duties of a government. George Washington believed it to be the firmest pillar of good government, and James Madison called justice the end of civil society. As Michigan's own remarkable current Chief Justice Megan Kavanaugh compellingly put it in a recent letter to Congress supporting LSC's funding, and I quote, "The promise of justice must be real to all who seek it. Justice for only those who can afford it is neither justice for all nor justice at all, unquote. Well, you have to forgive me a personal reflection, because in 1975, Michigan's own and our country's 38th President of the United States, Gerald R. Ford, asked my father, Edward Levy, to serve as the nation's 71st Attorney General. And as my father concluded his service to our country in that role, in his farewell address to the United States Department of Justice, he reminded us that the values upon which our system of justice is founded can never be won for all time. They must always be won anew. Well, during these past nearly 51 years, LSC and its 130 grantees have done their very best to win anew our nation's foundational promise of liberty and justice for all. Thank you for joining us here today, and thank you for all of your support for equal justice here in Michigan and across our country. Thank you, and it is now It is now my great privilege to introduce a person who wanted to be here in person to welcome you, but due to other commitments, Governor Gretchen Whitmer wasn't able to be with us in person, but she shared some remarks we'll play in just a moment. The governor has served as Michigan's governor since 2019, building on a distinguished political career that began in 2000 with her election to the Michigan House. She went on to serve in the Senate from 2006 to 2014. Before running for governor, she served as interim prosecutor for Ingham County and previously practiced law at Dickinson Wright. We're grateful to the governor for her continued support of expanding access to justice for all Michiganders and for taking the time to share her thoughts with us today. Governor Whitmer.
It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's forum on increasing access for justice. We are here to discuss the critical role civil legal services play in helping people solve life-changing legal problems. The hard work and dedication of our legal aid lawyers here in Michigan helps real people every day, working parents with criminal records in search of jobs or housing, seniors who've been victims of fraud or abuse, veterans seeking benefits, and more. Access to justice is not a partisan issue. It's an American value. As governor, I signed Clean Slate and Clean Slate for Kids bills, making hundreds of thousands of Michiganders eligible for automatic set-aside, expanding their opportunities for housing and jobs. We've invested millions in community jail diversion programs, community violence intervention, and services for victims of crime. This collective work is part of our commitment to get things done for Michiganders and deliver real change. You are all a part of that, and I want to thank you for your tireless efforts each and every day. Thank you for all you do. Let's keep working together to ensure equal access to justice and help more families make it in Michigan.
Thank you so much, Governor Whitmer. And it's now my great privilege to introduce Judge Stephanie Dawkins Davis, the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Prior to her elevation to the appellate bench, she served as the United States District Judge for the Eastern District of Michigan right here in Detroit, and as a magistrate judge in the same court. Judge Davis began her legal career as a defense lawyer at Dickinson Wright, and later spent several years in both the civil and criminal divisions of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Michigan. As a result of her public service, Judge Davis has received a number of honors and awards, including the Champion of Justice Award from the State Bar, a Director's Award from the United States Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Award for Outstanding Service, and the Bridget Vance Vision of Service Award for her work with youth violence prevention. It is my privilege to introduce the remarkable Judge Davis.
All right, thank you, John, for that gracious introduction. And congratulations to LSC on over 50 years of work actually providing services and civil legal aid to low and no income Americans. It is truly a tribute to you when I look at the breadth and depth of the work that your organization does, and I congratulate you. So I want to start off by asking a question that I suspect that everyone in this room knows the answer to, and that is, why is this work important? John gave us several reasons from our founding fathers in terms of why they thought the cause of justice was so important, and I will add to that one that I ran across from Alexander Hamilton, who said the first duty of society is justice. And when I ran across that quote, I coupled it with another quote that is of more recent vintage from Bryan Stevenson, in which he said, "The opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice." And I think that if you take those two concepts together, they really encapsulate why the work of LSC and why the work of individuals who assist with civil legal assistance for low-income Americans is so important. But it also caused me to reflect back on my own career and some of my own experiences. And I thought back to my third year of law school, when I worked as an assistant city attorney for the city of St. Louis, Missouri. As an assistant city attorney, and I really use that term loosely. I was waived in as a law student to be able to act in that capacity. But what I did was I prosecuted violations of St. Louis's housing code and its vehicle restrictions. The vehicle restrictions were not moving violations. So it might vary from anything from, hey, you need to do more tuck pointing on your house, to your porch is falling apart, and people would receive citations for this, and they would have to come and defend in court. The same for the vehicle. Maybe your vehicle is on bricks in the front of your house, and that's a violation, and you receive a citation. So by the time they would come to the St. Louis City Court to see me, the brand new student prosecutor, this was their trial date. These were civil violations. But the penalties were potential fines that would have a really hard effect on the individuals who would receive the citations. My first day there, I got plopped into the courtroom, and I looked at the door, and there was probably about 30 or 40 deep. It was really a kind of a cattle call, if you will, of individuals who had received these citations. And to a person, what I would see on the faces of the individuals who were coming to appear on these citations was intimidation, confusion, maybe a little bit of frustration. And I will tell you, probably the only thing, well, there are probably two things that made it at least a little bit bearable for them. One is they would look to the other side of the courtroom, and they would see me, the shiny new law student, who also looked confused, intimidated, and it was clear that I might not know quite what I was doing. But the second thing that probably made it bearable for them was that there was a paralegal who was assigned to the courtroom. Her name was Mary. And Mary knew the system inside out, upside down, and from backward to forward. And Mary, they would go up to the table, they would check in with their pieces of paper, usually the citation and whatever else they had gotten to tell them to come to court, and she'd tell them exactly what they needed to do, where they needed to stand, what was going to happen, what they might expect. And thank goodness for me, she did the same thing. She told me where to stand, what I needed to do, and we moved forward. The other thing that the litigants had was a judge there who was very committed to the cause of justice, who understood that these were regular folks who were living their lives, and maybe they hadn't tuck pointed, maybe they needed to replace their gutters, but they were there for justice. And invariably, what he would do is one of about three things. He'd ask them if they needed more time. Oftentimes they did, and they'd get a delay. He'd send them over to talk to me to see if there was something that could be worked out, whether a fine could be reduced, whether there was just more time that they needed to take care of whatever needed to be taken care of, or alternatively, they could have their trial right there on the spot. And that, I believe that did occasionally happen every once in a while, but the first two things are what usually happened. And for me, again, Mary was very helpful in telling me what was within my authority to allow them to do and not to do. The second, I guess, experience early in my career that makes me think about what it means to have true access to justice was my time at Dickinson Wright. John mentioned I started my career there, and the firm was a great proponent of pro bono work. And so one of the things that I did was I volunteered at the Women's Justice Center, and I assisted victims of domestic abuse who came in and wanted to obtain PPOs against their abusers. And the scene was similar but not the same. Women would invariably come into the room, they'd see me sitting behind a desk, and that's all that would be there. We were on the second floor of a church over near, well, it's Comerica Park now, but it wasn't Comerica Park back then. And they'd come in and they'd see me. Hopefully they didn't feel intimidated because it was just little old me, but there was certainly an uncertainty and I think a little bit of intimidation just at the process. The thing that I hope that the women who came for the PPOs, as well as the individuals who were appearing in that municipal court back when I was a law student, the thing that they had in common was that by the time they left, they felt heard, they were treated with respect, and their dignity was honored. I mention that because those personal experiences really gave substance to the words that I shared with you from the quotes. Our duty, our first duty, is justice. And one of the core agreements that we as Americans kind of recognize in our society is that we are a nation that will adhere to the rule of law. The system that we have in place to enforce that adherence is our justice system. So to satisfy that core agreement, we need for folks to have confidence in that system. We need for them to believe in that system. And whether or not they have confidence in that system is largely shaped by those of us, including everyone in this room who acts as an attorney or an advocate on behalf of those who need assistance, to honor their dignity, to respect them, and to ensure that they are heard. So how can we continue to build on making their experience a positive experience? We know there's barriers, right? I've talked about some of them. The law is sometimes complex. The system includes fees that an individual who's seeking assistance might not have even anticipated existed. There's paperwork, and there's deadlines that by the time the average person who's maybe receiving something in their mail that they're going to be evicted or something is going to affect their livelihood, some of those deadlines might have passed already. But the good news that I know all of you know is that there are barrier breakers. And the barrier breakers are all of you in this room and everyone who hears my voice. You know, lawyers get a bad rap. People like to quote Shakespeare's famous line about first let's kill all the lawyers, not realizing, of course, that that was actually bidding to lawyers because we are the ones that stand between individuals and not receiving justice. but we're also barrier breakers for another reason. I often like to think about what we do in terms of movies. And one movie was Taken, in which Liam Neeson, if for any of those of you who saw it, played a retired CIA agent or some operative from some agency. And the best line, I think, from that film is when Liam Neeson turns to one of the antagonists and says, "I have a particular set of skills." Well, those of you who are in this room, whether you are an advocate or whether you are an attorney who's representing indigent clients, has a particular set of skills. And those skills are the very things that are needed to break down those barriers that we talked about, right? We know from LSC's own statistics that over 70% of Americans who are either low income or have no income will encounter some civil legal problem that they need assistance with, but for which they will receive little or no legal assistance. LSC does probably more than anyone to stand in that gap, for sure. But to accomplish the justice that Americans are entitled to, that members of society are entitled to, we have to all pitch in to that system. The system is intimidating. And so I want to talk to you a little bit from the judicial perspective, and in particular, the federal judicial perspective, although I'm sure that many of my state colleagues share this perspective also. It has been my experience that when a litigant has a trained advocate at their side to assist them with a case, cases tend to move more efficiently. Those barriers that we talk about tend to fall away. It doesn't mean that the result is going to be exactly what the litigant wants, but it helps to raise the comfort level of the litigants, and it helps for the machinery, if you will, of the system to work well. And it also helps for the individual litigant to have confidence in the system. And why would that be important from a judicial standpoint? Perhaps it's obvious, but one of the things that I think about, particularly now, is that we see all of these stories about how we are at a record low in terms of confidence in the judiciary, even confidence in the justice system. And so that means that everyone, and particularly those who are representing underrepresented folks, folks who are indigent, folks who maybe don't have the means to navigate the system, are ensuring that people have confidence in that system. When litigants come before us and are comfortable with the proceedings as they have unfolded, then they can walk away and talk to the next citizen and give them advice about what they can do to help them in their situation. So what does that look like for a federal appellate judge? The Sixth Circuit is comprised of 4 states, Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and we have attorneys who sign up to do pro bono advocacy at the appellate level for individuals, as well as clinics from law schools who appear before us. This all helps with building the confidence and rebuilding the faith in our justice system. At the district court level, it went beyond that. Of course, there are pro bono attorneys. When I was a private attorney, I took on a pro bono matter in federal court, and it was my very first opportunity to appear in federal court when I took on a prisoner civil rights case. But beyond pro bono activity, one of the things that the district court here in the Eastern District of Michigan did was started a pro se legal clinic so that individuals who were representing themselves would be able to break down some of those barriers themselves. So a law professor overseeing law students, much like I was my 3rd year of law school, sits in a room and can, on an as-needed basis, give advice to individuals who, this is how you file a complaint. This is what you need to do to answer that. This is how you need to sign up for the electronic system that the court uses. They also started a prisoner mediation system. And they were one of the first districts in this country to start the prison mediation system. Now, we talked about the barriers that individuals who have not had their liberty taken away may face when they're navigating their way through the system. If you're someone who is in a Michigan prison or in a state prison anywhere, there are other obstacles. You can't necessarily meet with your lawyer whenever you want. You can't drive over to your lawyer's office. You might not be able to see evidence exactly when you want to see it. And so if you're a litigant who has a concern, one that is enough that you would want to file a complaint concerning the conditions in which you are being kept, it's important that you have an opportunity to be heard. And so the mediation system allows for individual inmates to actually mediate and use ADR so that they can resolve issues short of litigation. Now, why am I telling you about this? You guys are in the trenches, you're out there, you're doing that work. The reason is simple. On a bigger scale, the answer is many hands make for, here it wouldn't ever be light work, but it could be lighter work. The other more micro thought is that LSC is at the forefront of ensuring access to justice for all. But if we do this right, as advocates, as attorneys, we can each play a role in fulfilling that first duty, that first responsibility that we have, which is for justice. So I thank you for your attention, and I congratulate LSC once again on your fabulous track record and fabulous role. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Davis, for those powerful remarks and for your continued leadership here in Michigan. Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Lucas, and I'm the Executive Director at the Michigan Advocacy Program. And it is now my honor to introduce someone who shares a deep commitment to making our justice system work for everyone, especially those too often left out or left behind. Beth Clement is the President and CEO of the National Center for State Courts, where she leads the nation-wide efforts to support and strengthen state courts in their mission to deliver fair, accessible, and effective justice. Many of us here in Michigan also know Beth as a former justice, the Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. During her time on the bench, she was a strong and steady voice for transparency, innovation, and ensuring that every person has a fair chance to be heard in court, regardless of income or circumstance. Beth is widely respected for her bipartisan approach, having been appointed to the Michigan Supreme Court by a Republican governor and earning broad support across party lines for her commitment to judicial independence and fairness. Beth brings to our forum today a rare combination of national perspective and deep local understanding. She knows the challenges our communities face, and she knows that civil legal aid is essential to meeting them. Please join me in welcoming Beth Clement.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm so excited for the opportunity to be here to speak with you all today. I want to begin by acknowledging the essential work each of you does. As advocates, attorneys, and champions for those whose voices often go unheard, you are on the front lines of justice in our communities. It is an honor to stand alongside you. I come to you with a deep sense of responsibility and a clear understanding that we are living through a defining moment for our justice system. My background includes work in all three branches of government, as well as private practice, including court-appointed cases for those in need of representation but unable to afford it. What you may not know, and why I am so excited to join you today for this important conversation, is that my first legal experience was as an extern in law school at Legal Aid. It was this experience that opened my eyes to the inequity in our justice system and the incredible need of so many at often the most difficult and challenging time in their life. It was that reality, the people, their stories, their often desperate need for help navigating the justice system that has resonated with me throughout my career and was one of many passions that led me to leave the court and take on the leadership role at the National Center. Our shared mission must rise to meet the urgent need for equitable access to justice, especially for those who cannot afford legal help. For millions of Americans, justice isn't just delayed, it is entirely out of reach. Poverty and inequality continues to shape who gets a fair day in court. Families facing eviction, workers fighting for wages, survivors seeking protection, all too often navigate our courts without legal representation. This reality underscores just how critical our work is, not just for the legal system, but for the people it serves. We must be resolute in our purpose. My vision is rooted in a fundamental belief that courts must be a beacon of justice, accountability, and integrity, especially for those with the fewest resources and the greatest need. Access to justice is not a lofty ideal. It is a democratic mandate. Everyone, regardless of income, background, or circumstance, must be able to come to court and be heard. Yet we know that for too many, that remains out of reach, and that must change. We are also facing a crisis of public trust in our institutions. When people come to court without legal help, when systems feel opaque or indifferent, we risk eroding the foundation of the rule of law. We must help restore confidence in our judiciary, not only by being fair and impartial, but by being transparent, accessible, and responsive. This effort demands more than policy change. It requires cultural change. Courts must actively work to earn the public's trust by being independent, principled, and focused on serving people, not politics. Judicial independence is non-negotiable. Judges must be accountable to the Constitution and the law, not to political pressures or special interests. Undermining this principle harms the integrity of our entire system, and those with the least power are often the first to suffer. A strong judiciary also requires respect among co-equal branches of government. Courts play a stabilizing role in our democracy, especially in times of division. That mutual respect must be nurtured at all levels, federal, state, and local. Of course, our courts are not perfect, but I believe deeply in those who serve within them, individuals committed to fairness and justice. They deserve our support, our investment, and the tools they need to ensure everyone who enters a courtroom is treated with dignity and respect. As we look ahead, I want to clarify and clearly articulate my vision for our courts, and I'm happy to be here to share that with you today. And that is a judiciary that reflects the values and needs of the people it serves. One that is fair, independent, and worthy of public trust. One that does not turn away from inequity but confronts it. And that starts with how we serve the most vulnerable. So what does that look like in practice? Part of the vision centers on transforming the court experience for those navigating poverty and other barriers. So we need to simplify legal information using plain language and user-friendly digital tools, including websites and mobile apps. We need to support civil diversion programs and in partnership with legal service providers, giving people time, resources, and space to resolve disputes thoughtfully. We need to maintain remote and hybrid options to remove transportation barriers and enable full participation in our justice system. We need to see continuous community feedback to improve services and ensure accountability. Continued support of legal service organizations is imperative, and we need to share the important and irreplaceable work that they do. And we need to embrace innovative approaches, and yes, I mean generative AI included in that, to help meet the needs of the public. This work is not easy, but it is essential, and I am proud to do it with conviction, urgency, and hope. A powerful example of innovation and action that comes from the National Center for State Courts Eviction Diversion Initiative. In cities like Grand Rapids and Lansing, courts are reimagining how to resolve housing disputes by embedding services directly into courthouses. In Grand Rapids, the eviction diversion team has organized job fairs, expedited rental assistance, and offered housing navigation services. In Lansing, the diversion facilitator has built a growing network of partners that provide tenants with financial counseling, job training, and even free computers and school supplies. These programs, developed in close collaboration with legal aid providers, demonstrate how courts can stabilize families in crisis and address the broader issues contributing to housing insecurity. They are national models for how courts can be agents of community support, not just arbiters of legal outcomes. To achieve this vision, our courts must remain strong and independent. When they are undermined by political pressure or partisan attacks, it is the most vulnerable who are hurt first. The rule of law only holds power if it protects everyone equally. I know the challenges that you all face: limited funding, heavy caseloads, and rising demand. But we also know the strength of partnership. That's why we at the National Center are committed to working alongside each and every one of you to expand access, elevate community-based solutions, and ensure the voices of those most affected are part of the conversation. Our courts must reflect the values of the people that they serve. That begins with recognizing access to justice as a moral imperative, one that strengthens our democracy, our communities, and our shared future. So as we move forward together, let us reaffirm our shared vision that justice should never depend on how much money you have, where you live, or who you know. Together, we can build a justice system that works for everyone. Thank you.
First, I want to thank Beth Clement for your commitment to access to justice and the rule of law, and thanks for coming and sharing your vision today. I'm Jennifer Bentley. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan State Bar Foundation. We're the state funder for civil legal aid in Michigan. Our mission we view as both leading on civil justice innovation efforts and funding legal aid in Michigan. We have a great panel here today to talk about evictions. And evictions really have a long-term negative consequence for families that touch different aspects of families' lives, like physical health, housing stability, credit scores, employment, child's ability to stay in the same school. And eviction is not just a housing stability issue, it's a legal issue, and it's one of the most common civil legal issues that families face. In Michigan, eviction cases have been the highest volume of civil cases filed in Michigan district courts. Over 158,000 evictions were filed last year. In 2024, the civil legal aid grantees provided advice and representation on 19,288 cases in Michigan. And when we think about evictions, you see stories about like ugly conflicts and images of people's belongings scattered on sidewalks. But today we want to reframe the issue and talk about collaboration. Our panelists include perspectives from legal aid lawyers, landlords, and courts. And they're going to talk about how they collaborate. Collaboration keeps businesses strong, keeps communities strong and stable, and keeps people housed. Their commitment to communication and problem solving makes a difference. The Bar Foundation collects data about the work and outcomes, and data confirms the effectiveness of this collaboration. In 2024, over 97% of individuals represented in an eviction matter had a positive outcome in their case. And 83% of the cases where legal aid provided representation resulted in negotiated settlements between the landlord and the tenant, meaning the tenant is not evicted and the landlord also agrees to the terms. That's a win-win for both parties. I'm honored to introduce our panel today. Pam Hookwater is the Executive Director of Legal Aid of Western Michigan. LAM serves 17 counties in West Michigan, up and down the lake, and they are one of the 5 federally funded regional legal aid programs in Michigan. Ryan Vandermeer is the founding owner and broker of Urban Farm, a property management company in the Grand Rapids region, whose portfolio includes 700 residential and commercial units that vary from single-family homes to low and mid-rise apartments and mixed-use buildings. We're pleased to have the perspective of a property manager here today. Jessica Maas is the managing attorney with the Michigan Advocacy Program. Jessica oversees legal aid work in Lansing and includes court-based diversion and rental assistance coordination. Ulysses Rosa is the eviction diversion facilitator in Michigan's 54A District Court in Lansing, and he plays a critical coordination and problem-solving role, connecting all parties with the resources and support they need before an eviction judgment is entered. So we're going to start with questions involving kind of what's at stake in eviction cases. And Pam, you became the executive director of LAM in 2019 and have led through a period of changes in the eviction landscape and shifting housing conditions. Can you help us understand how eviction has evolved over time and why does eviction prevention matter?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for letting us talk about this today, because eviction diversion programs are something that we're really excited about in the state of Michigan. So as Jennifer said, I became executive director in 2019, so pre-pandemic, and I had practiced as an attorney with legal aid for 18 years before becoming the executive director. And what an eviction looked like when I was practicing was there would be a hearing, and maybe you found your way to a legal aid office before that hearing, but maybe you didn't. And if you showed up, it was a cattle call, and you maybe had 60 seconds to come up with an eviction defense that would get you a trial. And if you did not, you would be given a judgment that you had 10 days to get out if you could not figure out how to pay your judgment. So a lot of people were defaulted, a lot of people were evicted, and it looked like a lot of other court hearings that you might go to. Things happened in 2020 for obvious reasons because of the pandemic. In Michigan, we had an eviction moratorium go into place in the middle of March. No evictions were occurring, and it was announced that those moratoriums were going to lift in August, which meant that everyone who otherwise would have been evicted for several months' period of time was going to be evicted all at once. And we had to figure out how we were going to handle the volume. But it wasn't just how legal aid was going to handle the volume. It was how are the courts going to handle the volume. And then we were very grateful that federal funds went to rental assistance. So our local housing assistance and resource agencies had funds to be able to help renters. But how were they going to process that? Because in that situation I just talked about, you might get a judgment that you had 10 days to pay. You would stay and get your judgment and then walk out the door and try to find an agency that was giving money. So what happened in creating these eviction diversion programs and how this looks different now, and this has changed over the course of the years, but essentially is adding a hearing and adding time for different resolutions to come about. It is providing resources in the courthouse to tenants and for just negotiating some sorts of settlements, as Jennifer mentioned. So increasing funds to legal aid organizations so we could have attorneys present on dockets, whether those are happening in person or by Zoom. having housing assistance and resource agencies or other social services available in the courthouse to help people apply for rental assistance or with other things that they might need in order to resolve their housing issue. And then just the advent of being able to use Zoom, making the courts more accessible in rural areas.
Thanks, Pam. Jessica, Pam talked a little bit about what happens in an eviction case, and if you want to expand on that from your perspective, and also talk about what happens if a tenant shows up without a lawyer. How much time do families usually have to respond or prepare their case?
Sure. So I just want to start with the caveat that, every court operates a little bit differently. For all of us who have eviction diversion programs, our programs operate a little bit differently, but generally speaking, an eviction case in Michigan moves very quickly. So from the time that it's filed, there's supposed to be that first court date within 10 days, which is very quick, and tenants only have to be served 3 days prior to the hearing. So it's very common for tenants to show up to court without a lawyer, more common than not. And also very common for them to have only recently found out that they even have a court date that week. So they're often, I think, focused more on the logistics of that. How, do I need to miss work? Do I need to get daycare? That sort of thing, when they're thinking about needing to come to the hearing that week, and often don't know that they could contact a lawyer or don't feel like they have time to do so. And so many people are showing up to court without a lawyer, and they often show up either uninformed about what their legal rights and obligations are or the obligations of their landlord, or misinformed about what those rights and obligations are for both sides. And so it's very common for us to hear from tenants things about their case that are they either are unsure about or simply have wrong. And so, for example, people will ask us, am I being evicted today? Do I have to get out today? Conversely, they may think that they have months to get out. Another example is that they may think that if their landlord needs to make repairs to their place, that they don't have to pay anything at all. The other side of that is that there are many tenants who believe that their landlord doesn't have to make repairs if they haven't paid in full. So there are just many sort of misconceptions that tenants show up to court with, and they're being asked to make these huge decisions for their lives, either uninformed or misinformed about what their rights or obligations are. And so, one of the huge benefits of our EDP programs is simply that we can give tenants the correct information about what is going on in their case, and offer them, either the best solution or a series of solutions that they can choose from an informed perspective in order to make the best decision for them.
Thank you. So Ryan, you're sitting between two lawyers that represent tenants. Can you talk from a landlord perspective? There's a common assumption that evictions are just part of doing business and a necessary tool to manage or collect rent. But in your experience, is that true? And what are the true costs for evictions?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the true cost is a lot of money. At best case scenario, 4, 5, 6 months worth of rent that's uncollected. You have the cost of repairs, the legal fees. So, I'm not speaking for all landlords, but landlords don't want eviction either. It's an issue of money. It's an issue that they've chosen this investment mechanism for whatever reason. For a lot of people, it makes more sense in a stock. So, or maybe they owned a house and they upgrade and they have a house they want to rent out. So it makes sense. They can fix it up when it's empty. It makes sense to a lot of people. And I do talk to a lot of landlords like this, and the nature of what we do, I hear a lot of stories, and essentially there's a lot of stories about the first rental property I owned, and I really liked my tenant, and they lost their job, or they were sick, or something happened. They couldn't pay the rent, so I gave them some time, and a month passes by, and then the rent didn't come as it was supposed to, and I gave them some more time because they were really trying, and then 3, 4 months passed by, and now that the tenant can't dig themselves out of this hole, the landlord is kind of out this money, and then they end up evicting. And They never thought they would be the type of person that would evict somebody, and now here they are, and they hire us as a manager because they never want to deal with it again, or now they just go and start the eviction process every time someone's late on rent because this was the experience that they had. So just a little bit of perspective there. We love our tenants. I think most people really like the tenants. We're human beings. Like, it's weird that capitalism drives our housing, but that's a political thing. But like, it's the world in which we live. So it's about money. So if we're out here and we could all come to the agreement that like the best thing would be to figure out a way to get the balance paid. I mean, most time. I mean, there's evictions that aren't about money, and there's evictions. And there's landlords that aren't fixing up their homes, right? So there's other things at play, but most of the time it's about money. So if we can agree that it's about money, we can collaborate and then figure out what to do from there.
Thank you. Ulysses, you help members of the Lansing community resolve housing issues in real time right inside the courthouse. Could you walk us through what eviction diversion looks like in the 54A District Court and what coordination it takes?
Absolutely. Thank you. This week marks the 3-year anniversary when I started this work. So today is ideal to talk about this for me. The first day at the court, I didn't have a computer, and the very first phone call I got was from a grandmother who was living in a car with her daughter and a 3-month-old infant. And that was my introduction to eviction diversion. It was at the very end, right? She had been evicted and she had nowhere to go. Within 4 hours, I got her into a hotel program that was temporary. It was about a week. And then after that week was done, another program got her into about a month at a hotel. And then about 30 days after that, we had her in a place with Section 8, and she was housed. But right from day one, I knew that this would not just be an attempt to divert an eviction. That I was going to have to hold on to every family, no matter where they were in the process, whether they were coming from homelessness or, about to be homeless. And some of those, of course, we prevented through the prevention dollars that were still available through CERA. I came in right at the tail end of the CERA funding. And then I learned also that very first day that the program would only work if the foundation was relationships. The relationships to the families, the relationships to the landlords, the relationships to all the stakeholders, to DHHS, to everyone involved, legal services, anyone and everyone involved in helping people. And that's when I became the community drone, where I just got to know what everyone did and ensured that any family I met with was going to know how they can be helped, whether it's senior services, veteran services, children's services. I embraced all of it. I call it my menu. So if anyone's doing something to help people in Lansing, I know who they are. They cannot hide from me. That's my daily mission, is to find out how you're helping people. And then that kind of transformed me into, he's eviction diversion, but now he's also a liaison, because these agencies did not know what everyone does. So now the agencies call me and say, hey, who does this? And so it's really transformed into this very unique segment in the 24 courts involved nationally in this program, because we didn't have it prior. We didn't know the need was there, and it's really helping to bridge a lot of key resources, and not just past due rent, but helping them to fix the areas they need to fix where they're not in this situation again.
Thank you. I want to follow up, because you talked about the 24 other courts that are doing eviction diversion, and Beth Clement talked about the National Center for State Courts Eviction Diversion Initiative. What advice would you give to peers on this journey to start or grow an eviction diversion program and have a community drone in every community?
Son, I think the biggest thing with crisis in America is that our culture is programmed to be reactive, right? We weren't prepared for Hurricane Katrina, and when it happened, we learned that the levees could have been fixed 60 years prior to it. So then we react to the crisis. And I think when in terms of eviction diversion, there's a lot that can be done prior to the crisis. And so what I've done with our program is, and encourage all the other courts to do so as well, is to proactively get resources out to the community. I'm one person, so I have to do it by email, which has now grown to a little over 1,400 households that receive food, jobs, apartments, free training, financial training, children's resources, senior resources, veterans resources, and it's proactively being sent to them. So I'm not waiting for someone to go, hey, I need this. I'm ready for that call, and I'm ready for that email to come, but I am proactively doing it. I'm not waiting on their cry or their crisis to happen.
Thank you. Jessica, can you talk about how MAP is participating in eviction diversion efforts and how you measure success in the work?
Sure. So my office has 2 eviction diversion programs, one that we operate with Ulysses at the 54A District Court, and then one in Livingston County as well, which is a more rural community. So those programs look a little bit different from each other, but in general, the idea is that we are on the ground, so to speak, now more on Zoom, but at those dockets every week to offer our services to any tenant who wants to be served by a lawyer. And so in our programs, any tenant who shows up to court and wants to speak to an attorney can speak to someone from our office that day. And at 54A, they can also speak to Ulysses separately in a Zoom breakout room if they want to as well. And so we are able to, triage those cases, figure out if they have legal defenses, what their best options are there other factors that would impact their eviction, and sort of offer them the sort of best solutions possibly for them and their lives, so that they can, at the very least, walk out of there knowing what some good options for them are, and Ulysses can talk to them about what other services in the community may be able to help them as well. And then from there, our office sort of evaluates who are the most vulnerable people or who will be impacted by our representation the most and decides who we can fully represent from there. And in terms of, measuring success, I think it's sort of, there's several ways to do it, both quantitative and qualitative. From a quantitative perspective, we're looking at the amount of people that we're able to help and the percentage of those people who walk away with a successful outcome. Successful outcomes can be measured several different ways, but in general, I think that we want the big picture thing is that we want people to remain housed. We want people to have housing stability, because housing stability is just such a central foundation for the rest of our lives and how successful we are in other areas of our lives and our kids' lives. And from a qualitative perspective, there are several other ways I think that we measure success. One is just relationship building with the courts and the community. I think that we have some of the best relationships in my office with the courts within which we have eviction diversion programs because we are consulting with them on a regular basis and are in front of them every week. And then another way that we are thinking about it is in terms of impact litigation. And when I say that in this case, I mean because we are in the courts every week, seeing what's going on every week, we're able to identify properties that may be problem properties in some ways, or landlords that may be problem landlords, and sort of come up with, as an office, strategies for dealing with those properties or landlords on more of a big picture perspective instead of just those individual cases. And then the third way that I think about success in more of a qualitative way is just the tangential issues that our clients are facing related to their housing, but not their housing. So many housing clients come to us and have other issues going on in their lives that we could also assist with, but in which they didn't know that a lawyer could help them, or that it's something that our office does. And so maybe they have a child support issue, or they have a public benefits issue, or they have a debt collection issue. And all of those are things that we could also help them with or advise them on that are related in some way, maybe to their eviction and their stability, but aren't directly their eviction case.
So Ulysses talked about all the various things that he helps with in terms of a facilitator, and now you're talking about the various legal issues that legal aid can help that might be barriers to someone staying housed. So thank you for that. Ryan, I'm going to put you on the spot again. From a landlord's perspective, what have you learned from EDPs, and how might more buy-in be built for diversion with other landlords?
Yeah, there's a few things come to mind. First of all, just as a general best practice for landlords, I don't know if it's happening a lot, but I don't know, you're not my audience, but I just want to say this. You should have a policy that is clear and is consistent and is communicated to tenants about what your policy about eviction is. So they know, so they're not caught off guard, because it happens fast. And we talked about how fast it can happen. And so for us, and part of that too should be a gracious policy. We give time. A lot of times, unpaid rent can be solved by the tenant just with a little bit more time. So our process, and this is best practice for us, is we wait 30 days after sending a notice to file, and we send, 50 eviction notices a month, and we probably file 2 eviction cases a month or something. And not that 2 is a great number, but 48, what's that, 96% resolved. And so that's one thing I would encourage landlords to do. Maybe the most important thing that we're seeing now, and this panel is representative of, or works in courts that, it sounds like the 2 courts that actually have these resources right now, or the 2 biggest at least, where the courts have taken action in their procedures. So if there's anybody out there that has a say or has influence over what that looks like, in Grand Rapids, we added, our hearings are virtual. Folks don't have to figure out if they're going to skip work or have to arrange childcare. They can show up to a virtual hearing. Default judgments are not happening almost anymore. I mean, generally there's huge participation there. There's a 2-hearing system. So during the first hearing, we have someone from legal aid and you have somebody from the Department of Human Services right there to connect them with resources. Before, maybe you heard your friend use legal aid or you saw a piece of paper and maybe then you called them before you got there. But right now you have somebody right there. Once you're connected with resources, and now maybe you're at your second hearing now. Well, you know about the second hearing because the judge told you at the first hearing. But if you've successfully gotten assistance, the judge will issue a stay. They'll set it aside for 3 weeks. There will never be a judgment entered against you. 3 weeks comes, you have assistance, that case is dismissed. Biggest thing here is keeping a judgment off of a tenant's record. Besides the actual physical eviction, if you keep a judgment off of somebody's record, they're not going to have a problem finding housing elsewhere later down the road. So these court procedures that changed post-COVID are important. The third one, and this is where a lot of the folks in the legal aid community can help, is the use of conditional dismissals. We really lean on those a lot. When we're in our hearings, we can go into a breakout room and we can come up with terms that work for the tenant and for us that agree for everybody. Maybe somebody from legal aid is there representing their client. We have our attorney, and I just need more time. I need the tax return to come in, or whatever it may be, and we can work that out. We can actually put it on the record in front of the judge. It can be written down. So from a landlord, it's a secure arrangement. From a tenant's perspective, there's no judgment against them, and they have time, and they can kind of work on things. That work for them. So those are, I guess, 3 things that I would encourage folks to think about. And then the fourth one really is the money. These assistance programs have to be funded. They kind of operate in silos. I know that from a state perspective, that's the easy one that everybody can go to, but you got to know what church to go to. You got to know who has the pile of money now, and it's not centralized. So figuring that out long term. When the SARA program existed, We'd have to twist a landlord's arm to take a check for rent. There was not even a court filing. It's like, hey, fill out this piece of paperwork, and my back rent would be taken care of, and the landlord was glad to do that. I think we can learn from that. These are expensive programs, but homelessness is a heck of a lot more expensive.
I want to talk a little bit about sustainability of the eviction diversion programs. Pam, hopefully you can help explain. Since 2020, with federal stimulus funding, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority has awarded funding to the Michigan State Bar Foundation to give grants to legal aid programs to represent tenants facing eviction and participate in eviction diversion efforts. And so the foundation and legal aid and the courts and DHHS and MSHDA met regularly to stand up these programs. The funding for the legal representation expires this month. Legal Aid of Western Michigan, along with other regional legal aid programs throughout Michigan, have received this funding. And so, Pam, can you explain what would sustainability in terms of dollars and results require?
Absolutely. So the funding that we've received, as you just described, between 2020 and now has been between $6 million and $8 million a year. When you look at last year, it was $6 million of additional funding through the State Bar Foundation originating in MSHDA that went to the programs. Jennifer, you mentioned at the beginning that last year there were over 19,000 eviction cases closed by the program. If you look at 2019, so the year before we had this funding, it was just over 5,000. So far over triple the cases where we were able to assist with that $6 million of funding. And even with that $6 million, we track how many people we could not help and provide full service to. And I believe that was around 6,000 people for last year. So yeah, if you look at the difference in the number of people we're able to help for that dollar amount, again, the price tag's about $6 million, a little bit more we could help everybody, and that boils down to less than $500 a case to be able to prevent a family from being homeless. As we said in the beginning, 97% of the cases we take have a positive result. 83% of those, the positive result is a settled negotiation with the landlord.
Thank you. Jessica, to close us out, can you tell a story that reminds you why this work matters?
Sure. So something I think about a lot is that in many of our cases, and this is especially true in housing cases, our clients would not be represented if it weren't for us. If we were not representing them, they would not have an attorney. And as a managing attorney, I spend a lot of time thinking about the people who don't know that we exist or don't know that we could help them and how to reach them. And oftentimes, I think the people who don't know about us are the most vulnerable, the people who could benefit from our assistance the most. And so our EDP programs, I think, are a way of us going to the clients instead of hoping that they know that we exist and coming to us, because we are just there for them in court as long as they show up for their hearing. And an example of that is a guy that we represented a couple years ago. He's a veteran senior. He has a HUD-VASH voucher. For those who don't know, that's a specific subsidy awarded to veterans. And there was a dispute about how much he owed in rent. We represented him. During the course of our representation, he became hospitalized and eventually had a guardian appointed for him. It was not going to be feasible with his health issues for him to return to the unit. But our attorney visited him at the hospital. She coordinated with his guardian to get him a storage unit so that a storage unit and enough time for all of his belongings to be moved out so that he could have the best outcome under the circumstances for him and his, life circumstances. Another example that I think about is a domestic violence survivor who had a very small child, and when her abuser was removed from the household, she discovered that they were many thousands of dollars behind in rent because he had been, she thought, paying. And so we represented her, and our attorney was able to negotiate with the landlord to reduce her balance by many thousands of dollars to the exact amount that an agency was willing to pay on her behalf to keep her housed. And so she and her very small child were able to remain housed. Right after that payment was made and that issue was resolved, her utilities were shut off, but we were again able to coordinate to get her utilities back on so that they could really start fresh with their life together in a positive way. And both of those are cases and people who did not know about us before court. They showed up to court and met us that day, and we decided to take their case on. And so without having our EDP programs, you know, those people would probably have very different outcomes and would not have maintained the same sort of stability for their lives.
Thank you. So that we're going to wrap up our panel, and I want to thank you very much for sharing your insights today with us. We heard about collaboration, we heard about benefits to tenants, we heard about benefits to landlords, and we really appreciate you sharing that. And thank you to audience members who are participating in these efforts also. It makes a tremendous difference to housing stability and families throughout the state, so thank you.
Let's give another round of applause to Jennifer and our eviction diversion panel. I'm Ron Flagg, president of LSC, and I spent a lot of my time as president of LSC talking about the justice gap. We've heard about it today. 92% of legal problems around the country and here in Michigan receiving no or inadequate assistance. A really staggering statistic and not one that the country can be proud of. And the answer, or the key to bridging a gap so wide, is leadership and innovation. And I think while the focus of our forum today is on housing, I think an important theme that we're going to hear from all of our speakers, certainly we heard it from the last panel, is the importance of leadership and innovation to bridge the justice gap in the context of housing issues. That's going to continue with my conversation coming up. We're talking about a particular housing issue. It's entitled Keeping the Family Home in the Family. And in particular, we're talking about heirs property. With me today are two people who are both leaders and innovators and are going to talk about applying leadership and innovation to address the heirs property problem. Ashley Lowe, as many of you know, is the CEO of Lakeshore Legal Aid here in Detroit and the surrounding counties. Darnell Adams is Vice President of Detroit Community Initiatives at the Gilbert Family Foundation, a philanthropy founded by Dan and Jennifer Gilbert and working in tandem with the Rock family of companies to build opportunities for Detroiters. Ashley, why don't we jump right in and tell us what heirs property is and why it's a challenge.
So heirs properties is when, it usually is multi-generational. So when property is passed down from generation to generation, but there's no legal process that makes it, gives people proof that they actually own the property. So it could be a situation where there's a will or there's not a will, but they don't go through legal process. The family doesn't. They know they inherited this property from their parents or their grandparents, and they remain living in the home, but they haven't gone through the legal process, so they don't have a deed or something to show that.
I mean, okay, you know, they're living there, they don't have a deed. You know, where does that trip them up going forward? As long as, you know, nobody bothers them, they're okay.
And that happens for a long time. So there could be generations where nobody has really addressed this issue. And then the person who's living in the home that thinks they own it, they go to access some sort of benefit that is related to home ownership. So they may be getting access to the winterization program from a city, or getting a replacement on a heater or some other home loan, and then they have to show proof that they own the property but they don't. And they don't have that proof. And so that's where they come either to a community partner or to legal aid to say, how can you help me figure this piece out?
Darnell, talk about, we think about this all the time in housing and evictions, the fact that when an eviction happens, the ripple effect in terms of education and employment and family issues. But what about the ripple effect in terms of heirs property? When a family is kept in a home, how does that affect a block, a neighborhood, a community?
It's always better to have a home occupied than vacant. And to Ashley's point, it's when a family seeks out a resource. You know, there are tax abatements that the city offers for certain income bands. And that's actually how, you know, we sort of discovered that this was a major issue across the city, because as many families, there are about 50,000 families that qualify for a program called Homeowners Property Tax Exemption through the city of Detroit, where you can get a reduced tax payment, whether it's 100% exemption all the way down to like 10%. And what we were finding is that a lot of families were coming in, they didn't own the home. You know, they didn't pass down, but they didn't know that they needed to do some type of transfer, which prevented them from owning that home. And so if you can't access those benefits, then you eventually just maybe have to walk away from the home because it can't receive the resources that it needs. And in a previous life, I was working for the Detroit Land Bank Authority. And we learned that, and this is 10 years ago, before inflation, before COVID, so I'm sure the cost is much higher, but with all the city resources that go into litigating, taking that property back, the foreclosure process, the demolition process, that's totaling more than $100,000 for just that one parcel. And it's creating, it's shredding more value on that block, because the more houses you have that come down, the less valuable that block may be. So it can have dramatic ripple effects, but by having that family there and having those resources there, it preserves that value for that neighborhood.
And so where the leadership and innovation in this whole conversation comes in is the recognition of what you just said, and the leadership and collaboration among your organization, the city, and legal aid. Can you talk about how that evolved?
Yeah, so I learned about Lakeshore Legal Aid probably in 2018 from one of Ashley's team members, Sean Riddle. We're serving the board together, and only heard great things. And as I came to be in this role at the Gilbert Family Foundation, we put out an RFP to see, are there legal aid partners that can help with right to counsel work? The city had just passed the right to counsel ordinance, and we do a lot of listening on the ground to see who are the right partners that that trust in community. And so we started this work through the right to counsel ordinance that kicked off, and we call it the Detroit Eviction Defense Fund, where we have 3 partners, Lakeshore being one, Michigan Legal Services, and UCHC being the other, to really just help make sure that families have access to legal services when they're being challenged with eviction.
Ashley, you describe people living in a house for generations in blissful ignorance of the fact that their ownership of the house was not documented formally. It strikes me, as in many cases, that public education is a key piece to make sure that before they come to grief, they address that lack of formal documentation. So how do you go about doing outreach in this situation? Darnell mentioned the term trust. Legal aid is always looking for trusted messengers in communities where trust is often lacking. So how does that work in the heirs property arena?
Yeah, so we, in addition to working with the Gilbert Family Foundation, we are working with the Local Initiative Support Corporation that's helping us to drill down in specific neighborhoods and work really closely with community partners, those partners being trusted in the community. So in the Bagley neighborhood, we're working with Live 6. In the airport sub, we are working with the Eastside Community Foundation. And those are organizations that are connected in the communities. People know them. They also also have funding to provide home repair services, so people are seeking them out if they are homeowners who are in precarious situations, and so they know to go, and then those organizations connect them with Lakeshore and our other community partner, Michigan Legal Services, so that so they know when they get there that this is a trusted resource in the community.
And that answer, just really shines a spotlight on how important it is for legal aid programs to be part of their communities. They're not just, sitting in their offices waiting for people to come to them, but they're actively in the communities, that they're meeting clients or potential clients where they are. It's so important. Darnell, as you described, this is not the first time you've collaborated with legal aid. The Gilbert Family Foundation, really did showed great leadership and initiative in the investment on the eviction, representation initiative. What has your past collaboration with Lakeshore and the other legal aid providers taught you, or how has it informed your philanthropic strategy?
That's a good question. So the most important thing is making sure that we're having the impact that we're looking for. And I can say very easily that the reports that come back and the results of like the Eviction Defense Fund work is showing that, what we thought was true which is most families, about 4% of families had access to legal services, and whereas landlords showed up to court with over 83% of landlords had representation, and we were watching more and more families be displaced through eviction. And as soon as we started working with these partners, those numbers dramatically dropped. So we understand their value, and even with the heirs property work, the probate work that we're doing, again, because we had that trusted relationship, we just dug in deeper and asked, is this another component that you're willing to step up and support? And it was an infrastructure that already existed. So it was, again, a very easy sort of collaboration that, again, we're netting positive benefits. Something I wanted to just add that you said earlier is the most important piece to the heirs property work is setting the culture, like the cultural norm of estate planning. As we started this probate work, this is getting enough attention that people are aware, their heads are up, they're listening, they understand that there are over 5,000 houses currently in the city of Detroit that are experiencing some type of tangle title, and there are thousands at risk. But the biggest opportunity, and we're doing this work with Lakeshore and with Neighborhood Legal Services, is once you get through probate, let's get you an estate plan. Once you get through a HOPE exemption, let's get you an estate plan. These are things that should just be the cultural norm that we see every day with these programs.
That's great, and it's so important. And of course, we all know that culture change is really hard.
Yeah.
Ashley, I love statistics. It's a horrible statistic, the justice gap statistic. But what's really much more compelling than statistics are client impact and client stories. Can you share a story in this area of your work?
Yeah, I'd love to. And this was a story that our supervisor in the project described it as Herculean efforts on behalf of legal aid. So it's a gem. We represented a client who was living with her child in the home of her father who had passed away. So he died in the fall of 2023. They were living in the home. They didn't know at the time that he had mortgaged the property and that they owed about $11,000 on the home. And they found out, of course, when the foreclosure process started. So they got notice of that and went to the mortgage company and tried. They had the $11,000 among their family members to pay it off. And they went to the mortgage company and they said, no, you don't have a property interest and we can't take this money from you and solve the mortgage. So they tried and kept going back and trying, and to no avail. And it went to a sheriff's sale. A third-party buyer purchased the home for $5,000. So in theory, they could go to the county and redeem the property for $5,000, which they had. And so they went to the county, and the county said, well, there's no deed recorded that shows that this has been purchased, so we can't do anything for you. So the client worked as hard as she could to work with the mortgage company, work with the third-party buyer, work with the sheriff to get the deed recorded. None of that was successful. So in February of this year, she reached out to Lakeshore, and we tried to do the same thing. We tried that negotiating piece, also failed, and ended up filing a probate case. The trick was that by the time the case got to us, we were getting really close to the end of the redemption period. So they were moving as fast as possible, so they filed a petition in probate, got an emergency motion to stay the redemption period, get the letters of authority to go in and take action, and then they were able to, had to file a motion to get the sheriff to submit the deed and file it so that they could redeem the property, which they did in time before the redemption period ended, and now are living comfortably in the home that they own.
That's right.
Last question. I always love when we at LSC or our grantees start an initiative or an innovation. I mean, what you have to have, your North Star's got to be, what do we want this to look like in 5 years? So Darnell, what do we want this initiative to accomplish? What do we want Detroit to look like in this context in 5 years?
Well, if anybody's watching the news, you saw how New York City was flooding. I think that we are living in a very climate resilient community that will be vulnerable to investors, speculators, et cetera. And I want us, again, to have a cultural norm where residents understand if I'm buying a property, I'm not afraid of death. I'm going to make sure I have an estate plan in place for my family. And having that cultural norm so easy that, you know, there's technology with legal aid partners that makes it easy to gamify creating your, you know, pulling your assets into a plan and just making it the norm. And there are other way more creative ways we could dig into this with the city as you are following that PTA. Lots of ways to make sure that there are touch points around education so that the norm is there. So in 5 years, maybe 25% of all new homes that are being purchased across the city are also filing for an estate plan.
Ashley, let me broaden the question for you. You can answer the same question, but also just in 5 years, you know, how would you like to see partnerships between the city, foundations such as Darnell's and legal aid playing out?
So thanks for that question. This is a really good example of what I would like to see in the future. Working with Darnell is such a treat because what the Gilbert Family Foundation does is they listen, they hear what's going on in the community, and they get an inkling that there's a problem. They commission a study, they get the research, they get a report that shows what kind of impact we could have and what's necessary, and then they reach out. They bring in the partners who are doing the work in the community or who could do the work if they're not already doing it. And the multiple layers. So this is a project, we're doing the probate litigation in this work. Other organizations are doing the estate planning. And we do a little bit, but it's mostly we're doing litigation and other groups are funded by the city to do the estate planning. And we're all doing efforts to do communication and outreach in the community. So that kind of collaboration, that integrated effort, and then seeing a problem and putting resources towards it really makes a difference.
Darnell and Ashley, thank you for your leadership and innovation, and please join me in thanking you.
Thank you.
I have the honor of introducing one of our clients who is going to speak today. But I first want to say, as Darnell mentioned, we first started working together with the Gilbert Family Foundation around our eviction work. And so together, the Gilbert Family Foundation and the city fund our right to counsel for eviction for tenants in the city of Detroit. And we serve thousands of tenants every year to help them prevent illegal and unfair evictions. One of those tenants is Janae Angelique. and she's here to tell her story today. She is a small business owner, she's a singer, she's a songwriter, and she first came in contact with Lakeshore when she had been served with a notice for a summons and complaint on a non-payment of rent case. I met Janae a few months ago, but I was familiar with her case for several months because while we were representing her in her eviction case, we got some contact in our eviction team from the landlord, and he'd reached out to both our director of our program and some of our funders to say that he was complaining about our program and saying that the place that she was living was perfect, that he would like to move his family into the unit. It was so great, and that our efforts were in fact ruining his business model, and he wasn't able to rent because we were causing such big problems. So of course, I was concerned about that. I didn't want that to be true, and I looked into it and checked out the file and talked to the lawyers who were doing the work, and not surprisingly, we weren't doing anything wrong. In fact, what we were doing was advocating in very appropriate ways for Ms. Angelique. So I'm going to let her talk about what that experience was like and her story. And so I welcome you and thank you for being here to share your story.
Good afternoon. So glad to be here, especially to sit and hear about all of the other amazing things that you all are doing as a collective to help everyone and people in situations where they need representation. My story, as Ashley said, is interesting because it did start off with a filing for a lack of payment for rent, which also turned out to be false because when I got the notice, I reached out to the management team and I said, hey, why am I receiving this? You know, the numbers don't look right. They looked through the ledger and found out that they had made a mistake. They had actually said that I hadn't paid for September and all. And of course I was like, well, did you lose my rent? Like I paid you $12.95. They had switched management teams, and the old management team did not allocate the funds, and the new management team allocated all of my funds on 1 month. So they ended up sending me a letter saying that I hadn't paid for the previous month. So what ended up being a mistake on their end ended up being a blessing on mine. Because when we did, in fact, go to court, the judge on our case had postponed the case until January. So in the meantime, I was put in like a breakout room where I met with Blythe, who was one of the attorneys with Lakeshore. And I ended up telling her about the mistake. And she said, yeah, because I don't see any kind of funds that you owe. Like there's nothing in front of us that says you owe anything. So upon telling her about the mistake, I ended up saying, yeah, you know, we've been having heating problems and we're having safety issues. And she asked me to explain. And I told her that as part of our lease, we were supposed to, as the tenants, be responsible for the utilities, and that during the winter, the landlord was supposed to be responsible for the heat. Well, free heat ended up being no heat. We were not provided heat. At the time that I spoke with Blythe, I explained everything to her. I said our back door does not latch and close. We are seeing like different incidents where people are running in and out of the building, children running in playing. We're seeing like things where you feel like people are squatting or like the homeless are coming in. And I kept bringing these issues to the management's attention and it was being ignored. Another thing that happened too was I ended up finding out that we had all been offered a master key. And this was because my son was also living in the unit down this hall from me, and his key opened my door and my key opened his door. So then I called management and I said, you know, I think you gave us all master keys. And they're like, no, we think it just happened to you and your son. And so I said, well, do you think that it's more probable that just me and my son have the master key or that everybody does? So they came and found out that it was. And so we move forward and we go to court, and Blythe had already instructed me, like, listen, do you have a thermostat in your apartment? I said, I do not. She said, well, if you can start taking temperature checks of what's going on and just start keeping records, that would be great. So I started doing that. So by the time we went to court for the first time in January, I had tracked 80 days worth of heat and the lack thereof. So at that point, there were 28 days where the heat was 65 to 68. There were 8 days where the heat was 68 and above. And then there were 44 days where the heat never got to 65 degrees. During the whole Christmas and New Year's, we had no heat at all. And mind you, these were like radiators. So if the boiler's off, it doesn't matter which way you turn that knob, you're not gonna have any access to heat. So when we went to court, not only was I told exactly what Ashley said, there's no problem in her building, she's lying, the owner stays there, we're gonna come to court, we're gonna prove that there's no problems. But the first time we went to court and Blythe mentioned to the other attorney representing them at the time that we were having heating issues, he basically told the judge that the issue was that the boiler was having issues in the whole building and that my apartment was the worst of it. So I don't know how he came about that information because I wasn't privy to that information at that time. But after that, they came in my apartment, put an electronic thermostat in, and they came for 1 week taking pictures of that thermostat, and they kept the heat on for that 1 week. And after that, they turned it off and they never came back and took another picture. But I did. I took pictures. I took temperature checks. I moved the thermostat to different rooms and let it stay in there and took pictures of that. And when we went back to court, not only did the landlord not show up, who supposedly lived in the building, but their attorney didn't even show up. And so they were sitting there without representation, and here I was with 3 lawyers representing me, and it felt like such a relief and a blessing because to be in a situation like that where you have someone lying on you and pretending like you're making it up and all the while you're suffering and you're trying to figure these things out. Like for the record, the lowest tracking of heat or the lack thereof was 59.9 degrees in my apartment. And at that point, I was reaching out to Blythe and I was saying, you know, where are we with everything? And she was like, they haven't submitted anything. They haven't asked for any discovery. They haven't done this. They haven't done that. But yet we were supplying everything. And it felt like such a blessing to me because I didn't have to worry about it. And there were other people in the building who were going through the same exact thing. And when I went to them like, hey, listen, I've got this great legal team. I've reached out to BC. The inspector came out. Here's the information. People were afraid. People were saying things to me like, well, I don't know because I'm a little behind in my rent right now, so I don't want to come to court. I don't want to give testimony. I don't want to give an affidavit. I don't want to show up because I don't know what's going to happen. And what ended up happening was, and I know that they tell me I'm not supposed to say that I won my case because it was settled, but we settled up. And we did win. We did win. And they ended up having to settle because their lawyer showed up with, let me tell you about this. The lawyer that did not show up left this poor guy out to dry. This lawyer came in with no knowledge about anything, and I promise you, I was sitting there in the courtroom, and he walked in, and he didn't even have a briefcase. And I was like, what is he about to do? He's literally walking in here with no briefcase, and they came in unprepared, wanted to postpone it and adjourn it for a week, and I said, absolutely not. By this time, we had been to court 3 different times, and at this point, you had already lied on me. You had already provided me with no heat, which was a basic necessity, and I was like, no, and I was confident in my team because my team had been by my side the entire time, keeping me in the loop about what we were gonna do, what the game plan was, how we were gonna execute it, giving me the confidence that I need, and was like, listen, just keep track of everything and keep moving. And what I was doing, I'm gonna tell you, it was really hard at times because first of all, I had no radiator in my bedroom. So I spent the first 6 months living in my, sleeping in my living room because that's where I had the space heater. So getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and it's freezing in your bathroom and it's freezing everywhere else in your apartment, the thing that you want to do the most is just go back, get into that heat, put that blanket on, and lay back down. But no, I would go, let me go in this room, let me take this temperature check, let me use my phone, then let me write it down and log it, then let me go back to sleep. And I did that faithfully for 4.5 months. And like I said, we settled up, it was worth it, and now I'm here today as the face of victory, as the face of surviving, as the face of courage, because I'm gonna also share this with you. There are people who still stay in this building. And what we did find out during this case was not only did this person not have, what is it called, the letter of compliance to even lease, but they also, and I found this out from a tenant who is there now, standing in water in her tub, and her sink does not even let the water out either. She's up to her shins every time she takes a shower, and she found out that they opted out of the $200,000 plumbing that was supposed to happen in this building. When my son was moving out the same month, he came in, there was water coming down from the ceiling in the common area and water coming down from the common area going up the steps. Not to mention the week that I was leaving, a pipe burst in my closet. I wonder why. Probably because there was no heat. So with that being said, I'm so grateful, I'm so thankful for Lakeshore Legal Aid representing me, believing me, not being intimidated when they called you and said cease and desist from representing me, but instead said, no, we're gonna continue to stand, we're gonna continue to fight, we're gonna continue to advocate, we're gonna continue to do what we are commissioned to do, and standing by my side and representing me, because like I said, we won.
Thank you, Janae, for that powerful testimony. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aiden Sova, and I'm a proud member of the Emerging Leaders Council of the Legal Services Corporation. I am also a trustee and vice president of the Ann Arbor District Library, allowing me the honor of being the youngest ever Black person elected to any office in the city's history. Thank you to those who clapped and those who didn't. I will see you after this. I am also a product lead at Google as well, but I think that's a little less interesting. LSC's Emerging Leaders Council brings together rising professionals from diverse fields who believe deeply in the promise of equal justice under law. It is a privilege to be a part of that work. As we continue this program about increasing access to legal justice, we turn now to a key question. What is the role of the private sector, especially corporate legal departments, in closing the justice gap? It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Robert Gray, a member of LSC's Board of Directors and president of the Leadership Council on Diversity, an organization that works to improve a more inclusive legal profession and expand access to opportunity. Welcome, Robert, and our panelists.
All right. Batting cleanup before we go to the ball field, is a distinguished group of corporate leaders in Detroit. And let's start by naming them and identifying them for the group. Jared Fleischer, Vice President, Rock Family of Companies. Jared, welcome. Kim Ray is Managing Senior Counsel, Ford Credit. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. Not to be outdone, we have another Kim. Kim Yorchuk, who is Senior Counsel at General Motors. Welcome, Kim.
Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. Okay, so we have heard a fascinating array of information regarding civil legal aid. But at the end of the day, the support for civil legal aid not only has to come from the community, from the courts, but it has to come from our corporate leaders as well. This has to be a joint venture in order to be successful. Economic development, pro bono, and access to justice are key components to any society's advancement. Let me start with Jared and ask you to talk about corporate responsibility and corporate opportunity as it relates to the development of community needs and access to justice.
Terrific. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and welcome to Detroit for those of you who are not from here. As I look at that picture, I realize I need to have more than one suit, so I'm adding that to the list. You know, a learning experience today. I don't want to match the headshot too closely, but we'll learn from this, sir. We'll learn from it.
You're so humble.
Yes. So, you know, at the end of the day, what I really want to talk about is the why. You guys heard previously, you know, the what in terms of, you know, our direct work with Michigan Legal Services and our support for the eviction defense program. But I want to get into the why. And, you know, I'm going to give you kind of maybe a contrarian answer. And there's a lot of reasons about the why in terms of how engaging in legal services work. And I'm a lawyer by training, by the way. I went to Harvard Law School and then forgot to pay my bar dues, so now I'm a non-practicing attorney, but I was a practicing attorney for a while. You know, obviously doing this work is a great professional development experience if you're, you know, doing corporate or law firm pro bono. You know, but at the end of the day, I really do believe it's about the value. It's about doing the right thing. And our company, and as does General Motors and Ford, we call our corporate culture the isms, and it's a series of sayings and value propositions that we live by. And one of them is do the right thing. And at the end of the day, the reason that I believe it is so important for corporations to support legal services is because it is one of the most effective forms of human services. It really and truly is. And, you know, you've heard here today about, you know, poignant stories of helping people through cases and controversies, okay? One of the things that we have found is that it is equally important to help folks navigate the legal and bureaucratic challenges of life, okay? So we provide a great deal of support, not just for eviction defense, but housing counseling. We expend resources to help folks, and a lot of it is legal or paralegal, to navigate business licensure processes or permit processes. You know, I promised I wouldn't be political, but, you know, one of the reasons that, for example, a lot of folks are going to have challenges with Medicaid is because of getting through a legal process, right? So we truly believe that to have a more you know, prosperous economy where more people can participate and advance themselves, we have to help them navigate procedural barriers, process barriers, bureaucratic barriers, which are largely legal barriers or which the legal profession has a unique set of skills to help people navigate. And by doing that, not just cases and controversies, but helping folks navigate legal or quasi-legal processes, it's how you can unlock their potential, help them be full participants in society, and help make the society overall stronger.
As the corporate, well, let's go back to the Rocket family companies and the relationship with the Gilbert family, and this idea that economic development is good for the business side of the community, but it is good for the individuals who live in the community as well. Their concern, their support, and their well-being embellishes that which you do.
There's no question. You know, we come from a very civic-minded company. Mr. Gilbert, you know, our founder and chairman, Dan Gilbert, you know, has invested over $1 billion philanthropically in the city of Detroit, and most of what he's done, even on the real estate side, properly understood, is real estate philanthropy. Won't receive a return on it any time in his lifetime. And you know, Dan used to feel compelled to say there's a business case for this. And forgive me, this is contrarian, but he would say, by giving our team members something to believe in, that this, what we're doing here is bigger than ourselves, it helps me attract talent, and it's going to help my company. There's a business case for being civic-minded. And I do believe that is true, but I also think it's more transcendent than that. I think at the end of the day, he does it, and he's instilled a culture in our company, like you see in General Motors and Ford, to do it because, we have means, we've been a successful company, and it's the right thing to do. And if we didn't do it, we wouldn't be, participating in our community to the best of our ability and making the difference that we can and should. So it's really a transcendent value. I push back on the notion that you have to have a business justification. You can do philanthropy and you can do pro bono legal work because you have the ability to do it, and it's the right thing to do, and it makes your community better and your society stronger.
It is not just the company, but it is those who are part of the company that make up its character. Kim Yorchuk, would you share with us some of your approach as chair of the Pro Bono Committee at General Motors about the importance of the individual lawyer who is in those companies doing very well financially as a member of the community, but the desire to share the knowledge, the skill, and the expertise that they have acquired with those who are in need. Talk about that from your perspective individually and as a corporate leader.
Sure, and I'll caveat this by saying I'm here also to take tips from Kim, who's been doing this much longer and much better than I have. I'm fairly new to leading the Pro Bono Committee at GM's legal staff, but one of the things that I have learned very quickly is there is a great amount of passion and interest from the attorneys in doing something outside of their day job, right? Giving back to the community in a tangible, tactile way. And sometimes that can feel hard to identify an opportunity. It can feel overwhelming, right? Because we've been trained in so many times to learn this is your area, stay in your lane, be an expert, and going outside of that to do something outside of your day job can be challenging, can be overwhelming. And I think one of the ways that I've tried to connect with the legal staff and get interest increased is to absolutely partner with all the different pro bono organizations, the law firms, to identify small opportunities, right, where individual attorneys can make a difference. They can feel good about it. They can know that they're making a significant difference in the life of someone who otherwise might not have access to the legal services. And it's something as simple as filing an expungement or doing a driver's license restoration, which may seem, in comparison to some of the projects that we work on a day-to-day basis, an enterprise project for a global company, so tiny. But then you get there and you interact with the client and you hear their story and you understand the difference that having a clean record or having their license restored will have in their life, and the ability to give those opportunities to the legal staff and have them slowly build on that and feel comfortable that they can still learn new things. They can learn the process with the assistance of our partners who are super skilled and knowledgeable and have the training and have the staff and the expertise to help us as baby lawyers in that area learn and grow and feel that connection. And I think that the more you can make it real for people, they don't have to, I think sometimes we think about pro bono work, especially coming from a law firm, I can't take, a litigation case, an appeal, a prisoner's right. I don't have the time. I don't litigate. And so it's also about being creative and finding opportunities, like some of the people have mentioned today, that are outside of our normal thought process of what can we do for pro bono work? What can, we can help nonprofits look at their articles of incorporation and make sure that everything's in line. We can help with different IP matters, sometimes helping people register trademarks and things for small businesses or nonprofits. And so all of this to say that, I think there's a lot of interest. I think it can be overcome sometimes by trepidation and insecurity about not knowing. And that's why everyone in this room is so important, because I think the more I can learn and my colleagues can learn about all the different ways they can play a small role in the great work everyone here does, the more we can get everyone invested. And not only does the community benefit, but the attorneys on the legal staff do, because they feel they're doing more than just their day job, which is important, don't get me wrong. But you know, you can feel a little bit disconnected from society. And I know I want to keep this short, but I did want to tell one short anecdote that I think illustrates this. When I was a baby lawyer at Honigman, I was supposed to be a labor and employment attorney. I got put in the commercial and bankruptcy department as a first year. I was crying about it. I don't know, I didn't even take secured transactions or anything that you need for this. And I was doing it, working lots and lots of hours, really feeling like, have I chosen the wrong career, right? And I said, how do I feel like a human again? And I ended up volunteering every Thursday night from like 9 to midnight at Children's Hospital in the emergency room as a volunteer, just like holding a baby so the parents could get a Coke or a water. And I just needed to feel connected to people, right? And just the small face of relief and a parent when they could take a deep breath during this really traumatic time really helped me restore feeling like, okay, I'm not just dealing with bankruptcies and money and people all day long. Okay, I'm still a good person, right? And I feel like I've been able over my career, especially most recently, to replicate that feeling with pro bono work. The relief on someone's face when they know that their record will be clean, right? And they won't have to disclose something on an application that happened 20 years ago that they've never done again, or they're able to, you know, have a custody arrangement that's stable and they can, you know, make work arrangements. It's just, so I feel like I've been chasing that, that feeling, and everyone in this room enables all of us in the private practice who don't get to do it every day to get back to that and do the right thing for the community. So just want to say thank you for that as well.
You know, fear goes both ways. The fear of a litigant having to go to court and face the landlords Nate talked about. The fear of a lawyer practicing outside of their practice area is also very real. But this is where Legal Aid Society comes in. This is where the legal aid community bridges the gap. Talk a little bit about that, the idea that because you have to ask people to get outside their comfort zone to play in this space, to actually represent people in an area that they have no knowledge of, as you've described. Talk about the relationship between law departments, law firms, and legal aid organizations as a way of addressing the issue of combating fear on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's a real fear, and it should be a real fear, right? We take an oath not just to, you know, practice law, but to do it correctly. And it doesn't, that standard doesn't change just because the client is a pro bono client. And so people who take that seriously should. And so I think the law firms, the pro bono departments, the legal aid societies, they're integral. I mean, we can't do pro bono work without them because they have the expertise, the training, they give the comfort, and honestly, they give the correct level of understanding and knowledge for, it's still practicing law when you're pro bono, right? So you need to know how to do it, and just the calmness and the patience I've seen from the legal aid personnel and the firms to sit with us and explain and expunge it 1,000 times over and over again. Just the generosity of time and the space they hold for people who probably haven't had to learn something totally outside of their zone in years, and to enable them to do that, it's huge. I mean, there's no comparison for that, and it's so important that that work is there, because without it, we can't do our pro bono work.
This is a perfect time to pivot to Kim Ray. And at the end of the day, leadership is a tone that's set at the top. We do things because our leaders in our organizations, as you say, inspire us and encourage us and provide a way forward. The corporate community has had an incredible relationship with LSC over the years, and on every time there is an opportunity to discuss the budget of LSC, the corporate community has played a role. Talk about that and the fact that practicing law and representing the company in Detroit extends beyond the four corners of this environment, too.
It sure does. As you all know, or maybe you don't, Ford Motor Company has been a long-standing signatory to the LSC letter to Congress. But I think Rob is somewhere in the room. My colleague Rob Mussel and I have traveled to DC to actually talk to our Michigan representatives and senators, along with the State Bar Foundation, on ABA Day. Our law firms also, Dykema has been a big partner with us on ABA Day. And we have had the tremendous opportunity to go in and tell our story and how LSC-funded organizations are directly tied to our ability to provide pro bono services in our communities. Nobody's knocking on the front door of Ford Motor Company saying, hey, I want a lawyer. It's not on our Facebook page, not gonna find it on TikTok or Instagram. The only way we can get out into the communities to serve the needs that are out there and connect all of the community with lawyers is through our LSC-funded organizations. You talk about, Kim, you talk about the training. It's so critical. When you think about a corporate pro bono program, and we have a long-standing one, we have documented policies, and we've got a committee, and we've got a tracking system, and we have all the things. But without LSC-funded organizations, it would fall on its face. And we've seen that in other global communities where there isn't that pipeline, and our lawyers can't get out into the community. So 1,000%, we rely on this funding to be able to get our lawyers out into the community. We've told that story. We've told very specific cases that we've worked on, and they like to hear that. They like to hear how it has impacted their constituents, and we've been able to provide. We've had all these lawyers and all these hours, and these are how many clients we've served in your particular area. And it's been really, really moving to have those conversations. And even if you didn't vote for it, you still like to hear our story. You know, we're not always 100% on obviously getting the support, but I think it's been really important to tell our story, and it's always been very, very well received. And so, of course, we go beyond the signatory. We take every opportunity we can to advocate for this funding, because we know firsthand it's the key enabler to get our lawyers into the community.
Well, you know, you just hit the nail on the head when you said it's not enough to sign a letter. This requires the will, the courage, and the availability of leaders to put their personal and political capital on the line. And you have to be measured when you do that, because it's not endless in its supply. But it's so important in this case. I'd like for each of you to talk about that, the absolute critical importance of putting your money where your mouth is, not only talking the talk, but walking the walk at the same time, and the energy that is necessary to scale what we do. This is not just the Detroit community or the Cincinnati community or the Cleveland community. This is America's community. And if we're going to support the legal process and the access of all of our citizens, it is going to take scaling what we do. And those who understand how to scale are the corporate community. So if you would, just your thoughts about looking forward, how do we scale what we do? How do we really create that umbrella that covers this country with the protective access to legal services? How do you see it? What do we do?
Well, first of all, I think you go onto LSC's website and find those funded organizations and partner with them. And I've certainly had conversations. We have lawyers across the country, not just here in Dearborn, Michigan, but across the country, and many relocated during the pandemic. And so our pro bono policy covers them across the country, and I've said, go to this website. These are the people you want to partner with, because we know that the funds are taken care of. We know that they're going to be great partners with our lawyers, and we know they're going to get us to where we need to be the most. So that's the very first thing I tell people to do.
Good. Jared?
I mean, it's a great question. My answer may be somewhat tactical, but I would presume that the main supporters of legal services are probably your law firms. They get it. I would also venture to say that General Motors and Ford are unique as corporations that directly support, LSC. Okay? I would presume that most corporations do not do what you do. And frankly, we don't. We kind of do it, we happened upon Ashley, and it's been very, very productive, and we, fund things that align with our priorities that happen to rely on the legal services community. But we did not have intentionality as a corporation that says we have a legal department. We should participate. We understand the value of legal services. We should participate in funding LSC. So, looking from a corporate development standpoint for LSC, it would seem like the opportunity to penetrate the corporate world more is, territory that is less plowed. And, I think the fact that, two of the greatest industrial corporations in the world do it is a great, precedent for why more and more corporations should do it.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes, you can.
I had the opportunity to go to the Association of Corporate Counsel, and I had a table, and I talked about our pro bono program, and I had a little flyer on things that we've done.
Before you do that, the Association of Corporate Counsel is not something everybody knows.
Oh.
Explain to them what that is, because it's very unique.
It's corporate counsel. It's in-house corporate lawyers, right, who all are part of this association. And I can't tell you, to follow up on your point, the number of people who came to my table and said, how do you get started? And they didn't have leadership support, and they didn't know how to get started. And so I gave out a bunch of business cards. I've talked to a bunch of people, but it's tone at the top for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Kim from General Motors. It's one thing to scale from the top, but it's also important to rise from the level of where all lawyers participate. How do we do that? How do we create that enthusiasm, that encouragement, and that initiative?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and the thing that kept coming to mind was just really finding ways to be creative and pulling out those little opportunities, and small stones make a big house eventually. And I think the more, as we get a new generation of corporate counsel coming in, they have different work schedules, different ideas of what pro bono is, and just continuing to tap into not only the needs of the community through our legal aid partners, but also to pull the attorneys. And that's what I did when I came in a year and a half. I thankfully had the leadership support. There was a good system in place, but it was a little bit static and stale, especially given COVID. Everyone was at home, sort of struggling with opportunities. And the first thing I did is send a survey around asking people, what interests you? What would get you to sign up for a pro bono project? And listening to the legal staff, and then trying to find partners who have those opportunities. And on the flip side, going to those partners and saying, what have you got? And just seeing, I got an email this morning from one of our law firm partners about a couple programs I'd never heard of that were super cool. And I thought, what? I would love to sign our attorneys up for this. So it's really just, I think, instilling a breath of fresh air of sort of saying, I think people sometimes, especially, who've been out of private practice for a long time, have a vision of what pro bono work is, right? It's prisoner all of which is important. But I think there's a slate of like common things that people say, well, I'm not interested in that, I'm not a litigator, I don't know how to do this or that. And they don't know that the breadth of opportunities is huge. And there's so many different needs, and they can span all types of work, all types of issues, geographies. And so I think just taking stock of that and really doing a refresh of what's available and letting people know that there's something there for you, and it doesn't have to be, you know, turning the earth around. You can do a little bite here and there and make a huge impact, and, you know, use your expertise or learn a new expertise with a partnership of the.
Let me end with a story. And I was never an in-house counsel. I was always a law firm lawyer. But I want to give you a story because I ended up being vice chair of the pro bono committee of my firm. And we were trying to find out how, as we've talked about, to encourage lawyers to participate. Well, it's interesting, one of the smallest satellite offices of our firm had 100% participation in pro bono. There was 25 lawyers, but the managing partner of that office was the leader in pro bono activity. And no one in that office wanted to be the one who did not do pro bono work. We took that model and we sent it to every office of the firm. This is a firm of about 800 lawyers, I think, at the time I was in there, with 20-some offices. And that became the standard, 100% in each office. It took us a couple of years, but at the end of the third year, we registered 100% participation of every lawyer. And everybody didn't do the same amount of work, but everybody had pro bono hours on their schedule every year. And when I left the firm and retired in 2016, it had a winning streak of 100% lawyers from that third year that we achieved it. How do we scale what we do? You're right. We have to be creative. We have to lead by example, and the tone is set at the top. Join me in congratulating our panel on a job well done.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, distinguished panel. It's really great to hear your stories and appreciate the work that you do. My name is Ken Panoki. I'm the proud director of Legal Services of Northern Michigan. As those of you who know me know, I never end bragging about my program. I'm here to introduce some special remarks in an upcoming video. Congresswoman Hillary Scholten couldn't be with us today, but she has a special message she wanted to send. So she kindly recorded some remarks and we'll share shortly. The Congresswoman has represented the Michigan 3rd Congressional District since 2023. She began her career as a social worker. She frequently worked with people affected by homelessness and housing insecurity, and later she worked as an attorney at a local legal aid center. She currently serves on the House Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure and the House Committee on Small Businesses. She's been a steadfast supporter of legal services. Please turn your attention to the screen for the remarks of the Congresswoman.
Hi, everyone. Congresswoman Hillary Scholten here, proudly representing Michigan's 3rd Congressional District. What an honor to join you here virtually this evening and to be able to say thank you, truly, for the incredible, tireless work that you provide to individuals in our community when they need it most. I know that you have been involved in providing services to individuals in Texas and New Mexico who have faced devastating loss following catastrophic flooding. Thank you for being there. As legal service workers, we know that you are there in the trenches with people when they need it most. As a former legal aid attorney myself, I know just what it means to be able to provide that support for someone navigating a turbulent time. I want you to know that I stand with you in Congress, fighting alongside the vulnerable and the marginalized, and also fighting to make sure that you have the resources you need to continue your work. Thank you for everything you do.
Everyone, please join me in thanking Congresswoman Skolten for her remarks. We have one more video to share with you today. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell hasn't been able to be here in person, but she also has a special message she recorded to share with us. Congresswoman Dingell has represented Michigan's 6th district since 2015. During her tenure in Congress, she has been one of legal services' strongest champions and a leading voice for legal aid across the country. She is co-leader of the annual bipartisan LSC Appropriations Support Letter. She now serves on the Congressional Access to Civil Legal Aid Caucus, and she has also been a frequent speaker at LSC events. Congresswoman Dingell serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce and the House Committee on Natural Resources. Let's hear from Congresswoman Dingell.
Hello, it's Debbie Dingell, and I'm honored to join you today in support of Legal Services Corporation and their important work. I want to take a moment to recognize LSC's grantees' work that they have done for disaster response, both in Michigan and across the nation. LSC's work helping disaster survivors with housing, family matters, FEMA claims and appeals, insurance claims, and so many other issues that hit when disaster hits is incredibly important. And I'm thankful to all of you who have contributed and helped give them the tools they need to be able to help others. As the leader of the Legal Aid Caucus, I worked with my colleagues across the aisle to secure funding for civil legal aid, because access to justice should never be a privilege only for those who can afford it. Legal aid programs funded by LSC serve more than 2 million people every year. Families struggling to keep a roof over their heads, domestic violence survivors seeking protection, children fighting for safe and stable homes, and veterans fighting to receive the benefits they've earned. But sadly, on average, these programs have to turn away nearly half of those seeking help because they just don't have the resources that they need to be able to help everybody. That means thousands of Michiganders and Americans across the nation go without legal support they desperately need. LSC is a lifeline, and without it, too many people face the civil justice system alone, often in situations that are already overwhelming to them and will be life-altering. I want to congratulate all of the awardees and thank the dedicated legal aid attorneys, pro bono lawyers, and organizations here today who embody that promise every single day. Your work is indispensable, and Congress must ensure that you have the resources to continue serving those in need. Thank you for all you do, and I'm going to keep working with you in the Congress and fighting for your resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell, for your must be late in the day, your inspiring words and your dedicated work to the cause. I now would like to hear some final words from Father Pius.
Thank you all. My name is Father Pius Petrick. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors for Legal Services Corporation. And just a few closing words. In these days, in this time in which direct service to the poor can be so fraught with worry, so fraught with uncertainty, and sometimes we can be overwhelmed by the pessimism that we face in the daunting and sometimes overwhelming challenge of providing those who need help. I am always encouraged, not by the budget reports I read or by the long lists of board books that I get, but the stories of the men and women who do the real work of legal services. That's what gives me hope. Listening to our grantees here in Michigan who work not only with the courts, but even with landlords, to not just overcome a legal problem, but help a person who needs help in a community. When I hear about titans of industry like Ford and GM, who are aware of the problems of legal services and go out of their way to help us in the work that we do. And even hear from members of Congress who work tirelessly to make sure that LSC gets the resources that it needs. And all of this is possible by the dedicated, even, dare I say, heroic people who work for our grantees, not only here in Michigan, but all over the country. It's these people that give me hope. It's these people that, even should everything else go not the way we want, I am confident that the poor will still get the help that they need, or at least a good number of them, because of the people who do the great work. So join me, and especially in this moment, thanking. And if you work for a legal services grantee, I want you to stand. And if you now, and join me in thanking all these people. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for all the work that you do.